At the beginning of the new year, everything is renewed. Colin, the CEO of X-Fuel Company, is attending a New Year's Eve dinner. Both he and his partner Danny are full of praise for the blonde woman in front of them, but a sudden earthquake interrupts the harmonious atmosphere. Colin escapes outside and unexpectedly discovers a massive wormhole on the horizon, into which Earth is subsequently drawn, ushering all of humanity into an unprecedented new year. When Colin wakes up again, he finds himself in a shelter, feeling dizzy, and still unclear about why he has ended up in such a state. The sudden appearance of a figure startled him. Perhaps he had slept for too long and was hallucinating, but the scene outside the tent left him even more bewildered. All he wanted now was to leave, but he was chased and stopped by other refugees. As the outside world was evidently extremely dangerous, the two massive suns in the sky were so blinding that people couldn't open their eyes. The entire Earth was a scene of apocalypse, with blue crystals falling from the sky, creating massive mushroom clouds upon impact. Colin was also affected and fainted again, his thoughts returning once more to New Year's Eve. At this moment, he didn't know who he was, where he was, or what had happened. Countless fragmented images appeared in his mind, and the figure in the mirror was even more bizarre, everything causing Colin a splitting headache. Fortunately, there was still Nurse Sarah taking care of him attentively. She explained to Colin that he had been in a coma for an entire year, and that the notes in his pocket might be able to give him some clues. After the New Year's Eve disaster, Earth was sucked into a wormhole and appeared in another solar system. Here, there are 2 suns and 5 moons. Compared to the billions of lives lost, mere amnesia is actually a very fortunate situation. The images appearing in his mind might be a sign of memory recovery, and the faces of a blonde mother and child made Colin feel that they were his wife and child. Sarah was confused. She had never heard Colin mention them, but even if he had, they were likely already deceased. It would be better to take some time to process the impact of all this. Colin's memories of the past resurfaced as he adjusted his appearance in the mirror. Danny was discussing with him about selling their current project to the government. Clearly, the product their company developed could have a significant impact on the world. But for now, the most important thing was to go out and search for supplies. In a post-apocalyptic world, as long as you're alive, you have to create value. 2 teammates led him outside, warning him to be careful not to be hit by falling methane crystals from the sky. What they needed to be more cautious of were the omnipresent electromagnetic clouds. The 3 of them arrived at the mall and split up to search, unaware that they were already being watched by Zoe, a thief hiding in a car. Colin, incredibly lucky, managed to find gasoline in the boiler room. Before he could fill the canister, the sight of a blonde corpse on the ground brought his thoughts back to the past. Besides his wife and children, he vividly remembered the moment the disaster struck. More inexplicable images caused him to faint once again. Zoe took the opportunity to snatch the backpack, which put Colin on high alert. As his notes were still inside, he could only chase after his teammates. Seeing Colin running far ahead, he hurried to catch up. At this moment, the electromagnetic clouds had already arrived. One teammate, in an attempt to cover him, was burned to a crisp by the electromagnetic entity, leaving the other teammate with no choice but to first seek shelter. But Colin couldn't care less. The notebook was more important to him than his life. Seeing the electromagnetic clouds relentlessly pursuing them, Zoe was the first to get into the car to take cover, and Colin followed suit, running into the car as well. This was a perfect Faraday cage, capable of perfectly insulating against electric currents. Once the turmoil subsided, Colin revealed the truth to Zoe, stating that he could do without the report, but the notes inside were extremely important to him. Despite Zoe threatening him with a gun, Colin clearly had some tricks up his sleeve. However, Zoe's accomplice, who suddenly appeared from behind, gave Colin a real lesson. His thoughts drifted back to the past once again. Danny was still tirelessly persuading Colin to sell the project, but as it was the legacy of his late husband, even if the government offered double the price, Colin wouldn't agree. He wanted to use this technology to benefit the world. When Jenny woke Colin up, Alex was already losing patience. He forced Colin to hand over food, but if Colin had any, he wouldn't have risked going out. In a fit of rage, Alex raised his gun, ready to finish off the useless Colin. However, Colin remembered that while he had nothing else, he had plenty of money. Despite Jenny's persuasion that money was useless in these times, Alex disagreed. A prophecy was circulating around the world. Soon, what has happened before will happen again, and the Earth will return to its original state. As lackeys, Jenny and Zoe had no right to oppose her decision. Without her, the two wouldn't have survived until now. She wanted Colin's money right away. However, Colin said that the money was potentially in his company's safe, So the four of them had to set off immediately. In the shelter, the leader Jack was very angry with Banner for losing Colin, but the urgent lack of medical supplies and medicine was even more pressing. He could only send Banner out again to search for Colin and scavenge for supplies, despite the radio reporting that the electromagnetic storm was getting worse. But they had no choice but to risk going out. Meanwhile, Colin and the other three had already braved the thick electromagnetic clouds and made their way to the company building. Methane caused a violent explosion on top of the building, and Colin also brought Alex into the office. In his dazed state, he not only recalled the safe's combination, he also remembered through a magazine on the desk that this mother and child were not his wife and son at all, but merely models hired by the company. The safe was finally opened under Alex's constant urging, and Colin, while he was taking the money, launched a surprise attack, but Alex was not to be underestimated either. In a moment of desperation, Jenny came to the rescue. She had long been unwilling to remain under Alex's control, and now was the perfect time to turn against him. The three of them escaped just before the electromagnetic cloud arrived. Alex, however, remained here forever with the useless money, but the electric stingers would not let things rest. In the matrix created by Jielan, Zoe accidentally touched the stair railing charged with electricity and went into shock instantly. In the critical moment, a stranger from the mirror appeared like a godsend, wielding an electromagnetic pulse cannon to neutralize all the electromagnetic clouds, and escaped with the three to the underground garage. A shot of adrenaline successfully revived Zoe. Kellen suddenly realized that this scene was exactly the same as the one in his previous hallucination. Upon hearing this, the stranger was thunderstruck, as such distorted thoughts can indeed occur in some people who travel through time, which is why Kellen had memories of the future. If luck is on their side, Kalen might be the chosen one who can save the Earth. But now, the situation is urgent, and he needs to drive the three of them out of the building. On the way home, the stranger introduced himself to everyone. His name is Jasper, and he is an engineer at X Fuel Company. Upon hearing this, Kalen was once again in a daze, as he indeed remembered seeing this person at the company. Jasper explained that the current situation must have been caused by the company's latest project at the time, nuclear fuel cells. At present, Earth is gradually moving closer to them under the gravitational pull of two suns. The ultimate consequence can only be the end of the world. But Kellen, who was in a daze at the banquet, had no mind to heed these words. See, disordered images and memories appeared in his mind, leaving him utterly confused. In the real world, although he had already arrived at Jasper's home, Colin suddenly awoke and explained his confused memories to everyone. Jasper, however, explained that this was because his consciousness was active within a time loop between two dimensions. If this were true, then Colin must know the location of the prototype of the fuel cell. Colin certainly remembered that he had locked it in his safe, but everything happening now had only one explanation. Someone had stolen the fuel cell and put it into industry. Right now, what Colin needs to do is to use his subconscious to establish a connection with his self in the other dimension, find the location of the prototype, and activate it in this world to help Earth travel back to its original time and space. Each time he falls unconscious is a perfect opportunity. Colin needs to make good use of this. Before the words were finished, Jasper operated the electromagnetic cannon to knock Colin out, causing his memories to flash back and his consciousness to return to the past once again. On the mirror, he found information about the fuel cell, which instantly brought back all his memories. He quickly returned to the hall, and indeed found a serious-looking government agent there. Colin immediately went back upstairs to deal with the guard at the door, and sure enough, he found Danny in the office stealing the fuel cell. He never expected that after being so open and honest with Danny, he would betray him for the government. Colin raised his gun towards B and finally retrieved the fuel cell. In the real world, Colin was once again awakened by Jenny. Jasper was overjoyed to learn about Colin's past battle situation. Now, they just needed to return to the company to find the fuel cell and restart it to correct everything. But where could they get the fuel needed for the starting device? Colin suddenly remembered his previous discovery A and immediately used the radio to contact the shelter. At this time, the Earth was getting closer and closer to the sun. Inside the precarious shelter, Sarah received Colin's message. She instructed them to bring all the fuel and meet at the X Fuel Company. He had already found a way to fix everything. Jack immediately ordered to follow Colin's instructions. Fortunately, Banner had already returned with the fuel, and both groups set off. Meanwhile, the past Colin also fled with the fuel cells, pursued by the government. However, in reality, Jasper's car was overturned by the explosion. In his final moments, The critically injured Jasper informed Colin of the way to fix everything. Use the fuel to start the gas generator. The gas generator would power the capacitor, and the capacitor would enable the fuel cell to operate. The rest is left to a miracle. In the past timeline, Colin made a big detour and sneaked back into the company through the back door. In reality, Colin continuously followed the memories generated from the past to confirm the final location of the fuel cell. However, his past self was still struggling in battle, so the present Colin could only wait for the memories to update. The past Colin fled all the way to the office. He hid the battery in a cabinet, but the government agents who arrived later tortured him severely, and even Danny joined in, forcing him to reveal the location of the prototype. However, Colin was determined not to give in, even if it meant death. As a partner, Danny also created a fuel cell, and although it wasn't the prototype, it was sufficient for government experiments. He decided to prepare a grand surprise for Colin first, then come back to hear about the whereabouts of the prototype. Faced with the beating from government officials, Colin had no choice but to reveal the location of the prototype. However, the moment the official checked the cabinet door, he suddenly attacked with a chair, knocking him to the ground, and even threatened the guard with a gun to hand over the keys. But it was already too late. The experiment had already begun, and the equipment exceeded its load, causing all devices to malfunction. Even Corey, who arrived shortly after, was unable to stop it, and could only watch helplessly as everything unfolded. In the skyward beam of light, a wormhole appeared above the Earth, leading to the current state of the Earth. But it doesn't matter. The present Colin will do everything in his power to correct it all. The blazing solar flares were about to reach the Earth. At this critical moment of life and death, Colin opened the cabinet door, and sure enough, the prototype of the fuel cell was inside. Sarah and the others in the shelter also arrived in time with the fuel. After some adjustments by Colin, the gas generator was indeed activated, while the entire Earth was completely enveloped by the sun's light. The electromagnetic source had also formed a storm, and Jenny could only use the electromagnetic cannon to create one last chance for Colin. As the fuel cell was fully activated, a beam of light shot up into the sky once again. But afterwards, there was no further change, and Colin collapsed to the ground powerlessly. He had truly done his best, and everyone else also felt a sense of relief. If this was the final outcome, then it wasn't so bad. At least in the final moments, we still had each other's company. At least we died on the path of striving. At least we died like heroes. But Jasper was actually right. The ex-wife really reappeared outside the atmosphere, and a brand new wormhole appeared once again above the Earth. However, this time, it was to take Earth back to its home. Once everything settled, the world indeed returned to its original state. As the countdown ended, the sky lit up with brilliant fireworks, and Jasper had someone to celebrate the new year with tonight. Oh, of course, Colin, who retained all his memories, did not forget to give Danny a New Year's gift. Happy New Year. You're fired. But right now, Colin has more important things to do. He had heard about how Jenny and Zoe met on New Year's Eve. Afterwards, the two of them traveled together to the post-destruction era. As Cled sprinted all the way, he indeed saw the two who hadn't met yet. He warmly called out their names. Happy New Year. As for how I got to know you, there's a story to tell. Although this story, contre, might be a bit long. The End of the Earth Disaster is a science fiction thriller film released in the United States in 2016, and it's also the most mind-bending movie that Aso has ever talked about. The screenwriter's creativity is truly eye-opening, and it took me quite some effort to understand everything that happened across the two timelines. Of course, the director extensively used montage filming and editing techniques. The countless flashbacks and interludes truly gave Aso a headache. But once you accept this setup, it's not difficult to immerse yourself in the plot and understand everything. I hope my narration can help everyone understand the complete storyline of this film and restore the most authentic excitement of the movie. Of course, if possible, I still recommend watching the original film. You might have different interpretations. If you have any thoughts after watching the film, feel free to come to the comments section and chat with Aso. Alright, today's journey ends here. Aso is off to develop new routes for everyone. Don't forget to subscribe and like. See you at our next destination. Goodbye. Zoom!